1,000 students at OSU paid for the DEI infrastructure. Is that a good use of 1,000 students' money? A lot of people would probably argue no. There could be many other things that 1,000 students' tuition could pay for other than the DEI infrastructure.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Narrative. Mike Andrews, David Mahan joining you, and we're going to talk a lot about what's going on across the street at the State House, David. Literally, moments before we walked in the studio here, SB 1 passes out of the Senate, and a busy day as it also went through committee and floor vote today. So tell us a little bit. We've talked about SB 1. It's the anti-DEI bill for college campuses and stuff like that. So just help us track the progress and where it's going from here.
Well, it did just pass 21-11. We had, I think last year, we had a record-breaking 7-hour of testimony.
Good night.
Yeah, hearing was crazy. They actually, the proponents had about 200 come in this time. And that's just typically what happens with some of these bills. And you say, well, the proponents only had 15, the opponents had 200. And it's like, well, nobody really supports the bill. And that's just not how these things work. But it's just one of those things. Pendulum swings both ways, and you've got some really good things that were said during the hearing that I think you're never going to hear in the media. And Brenner made a couple points when he's talking about diversity on a college campus. He said 93% of higher ed donations went to Democrat candidates versus Republicans. And then he brought up in the 80s where it was like 50-50, Republican versus Democrat. So you can talk about diversity of, thought, right? And it's versus diversity of, race. I think that's what people are really wanting on both sides, right? We just want fair play. Let folks talk about these issues, good, bad, and ugly, even as it pertains to race. And I think so many people that I heard just on the other side of the aisle is just saying, well, you don't want to talk about the ugly parts of race. That's nothing about that is in the bill at all.
Well, in terms of public opinion, I know I have the privilege, I guess you could say it that way, of monitoring the public inbox for CCV. And after Monty Lobb of the Christian Business Partnership testified on SB 1 in a committee hearing, we got a note from somebody out there in the community says that it is anti-Christian to oppose DEI and that we needed to talk to a black pastor to get both sides of the story. David, you know anybody we could talk to?
You just gonna put me on the spot. First of all, I've never been a senior pastor, and so don't want to degrade the pulpit in that manner.
Well, you're a minister. I think given the circumstances, we can pinch hit you in on this one.
Yeah, the whole issue is race neutral options to helping folks in need. Right. There are ways to helping kids in need from disadvantaged communities, both black, white, or otherwise, than just basing it on race. Bottom line is, in the U.S., even just recently in the U.S. Supreme Court, it's been deemed unconstitutional to combat racism with more racism.
Imagine that.
You just can't do it. And so many times we talk around these issues. I just feel like it's really not an issue. I'm about equality of opportunity over equality of outcomes. I'm about diversity of thought on campuses and equality of opportunity. This bill clearly says a few things. It ensures intellectual diversity in the classroom among faculty, right? We spent, $15 million at Ohio State on DEI programs. Wait a minute, not DEI programs, DEI staff.
Okay. And who knows what they were doing.
Right. And so, again, this is a group, the civil rights movement got co-opted by this DEI stuff years ago. In the same manner that a lot of this gender ideology was kind of adopted as, we just want to love all people back in the day. This is the other way that they're kind of co-op movements, which is really disgusting. And in terms of, if you're going to talk about, a black pastor needs to speak on this, let's talk about, the real civil rights movement versus what these knuckleheads have made it today. The pendulum is swinging the other way.
Yeah, and if you want more information about what DEI is, if you're a little confused because we just jumped into the conversation, we've touched on it in previous episodes, but today we're going to talk with Rachel O'Brien from Open the Books. and look at specifically what's going on at Ohio State, get behind that $15 million figure that you just mentioned, David, and Monty's going to tag in. We're going to get to hear from him on the podcast as well. We did record that a week or so ago after Monty had testified, so we didn't know that the bill had passed at that point. So if you hear some I guess, mischronology on how we're talking about the bill in the interview, exactly, versus the fact that it did pass today, I want to be clear. It has passed out of the Senate, so have that in your mind as you listen to the interview. It's a great conversation. I'm sure you really enjoy it. And it's just one of many things that's going on across the street right now. Is into February, things are picking up. What else are you seeing moving bill-wise across the street right now, David?
Once again, we're talking marijuana over there. That's a big one. Senator Huffman has got SB 56. And honestly, there's a lot of good things in there. Again, I feel like it's kind of a tragedy and hope situation where we create a problem in 2014 and then all of a sudden we're going to be the hope, right in a white style and to fix it. So, there's a lot of stuff in there about, can property owners say that, you can't smoke marijuana in our premises, right, to lessees. And so that's in there. Breaks down the total amount of plants, from 12 to 6, which, that's still like 500 joints a year, just from one plant, or from 6 plants, what I mean? So, but we're talking about potency now. We're talking about, can we get some research money in there so that we can properly diagnose the problem that this ballot initiative caused with legalizing recreational marijuana. So, that's going on. And really what we have to do, Mike, is get a new brain trust of marijuana, right? It just seemed like all eyes on one senator. And when I walked the halls of the State House asking people about, what marijuana is, the difference between 60s THC versus, the THC that we're dealing with today with the concentrates, nobody seems to know anything. So we're trying to create a new brain trust with marijuana now. Yeah,
there's that information that's got to get out. We've talked at length, and especially around issue 2, about how this is targeted at kids as well with some of the packaging and the edibles and all
and there's
those
some good
things
in there in SB 56 about advertising and things like that. So there's a lot of good stuff in the bill. Kudos to Senator Huffman. We just have conversations going on about how we can make it better.
Yeah. And another thing that came out of the State House literally this afternoon as we sit here and record this is we've got a new lieutenant governor. And Ohio State's just winning all over the place these days. National championship. We get J.D. Vance, an OSU grad, in the White House. And Jim Tressel's our lieutenant governor.
Right.
Where did this come from?
How will this decision impact next year's Michigan game? That's what I care. The brother was 9-1 when it came to beat Michigan. And we need a little bit of that going into 2026.
That's right. Well, and he even referenced, I remember watching his speech when he was hired. He said 310 days from now, you're going to be proud of our boys against Michigan. And he referenced that when he talked to the press on Monday about accepting the nomination to be lieutenant governor. He's like,
who knew he was calling an audible on this?
I know. That was something else. Kind of like calling an audible on what we're calling the Gulf of Mexico these days. Or, excuse me, the Gulf of America. Gulf of America. Ladies and gentlemen, it's official. It's on Google Maps.
I've wasted probably 16 hours sitting in my office looking at Google Maps to see at what point it would change from Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America.
Aaron, I hope you're paying attention to how many hours this man said he wasted before he signed his paycheck this week.
Hey, that was a policy decision. That falls within the realm. But what I learned, though, Mike, not every nation has to call it the Gulf of America. Right, which I think is kind of lame. I did look at, Encyclopedia Britannica, and so they're still calling it Gulf of Mexico, but, they say Trump, renamed it Gulf of America, but I still think it's cool.
Well, somebody came along and created a fifth ocean a couple of years ago. We got the Southern Ocean now. That never learned about that when I was in school.
Can we anybody randomly rename? So could Lake Erie be Lake Lisi, like my wife?
Sure.
Is that something that we can, Sam, look that up.
I don't know. Maybe if you get like mahanmaps.com or something.
Mahanmaps.com. Okay. All right.
It could be a thing. Could be your side hustle. You never know.
We all have one around here. So.
Well, you also got to get rid of the plastic straw side hustle that you got going on because Trump says no more. No more paper straws.
First of all, I never was one that had a problem with plastic straws. What I mean, you had a problem with plastic straws?
I didn't have a problem with like the paper straws. I'm with Trump on that one.
Forgive me. That's what I'm saying. I had no problem with the paper straws.
Okay.
I mean, he was talking about drinking hot beverages. Who drinks a hot beverage with a straw?
Yeah, that's not a thing.
First of all,
I've never met a person that drinks a hot beverage from a straw. If you're out there, please send us a message. I need to know.
If it takes you 30 minutes to drink your beverage anyway, you probably shouldn't have ordered it. I've never had a straw go bad. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I know I'm probably going to get hate from MAGA America, but I just
send your complaints to.
Sorry.
We won't dox you on that one. But Trump continues to deliver on his promises, as we talked about last week, and that was not an executive order that was signed, so we didn't get to talk about it.
It is interesting to hear. You see all of these Democrat folks protesting. Department of Education, all these USAID or whatever, and the media is just blowing it up. But you look at his approval ratings, it's well above 50% still, and so they're just not listening, and it's really going to hinder the party. And if they don't, at some point, start listening. And some Democratic commentators are actually saying that. Like, can we stop, guys? This is ridiculous.
Yeah, for sure. And I can take or leave paper, plastic straws, whatever. What I don't understand is the paper straw and the plastic wrapper. That definitely should go.
That's pretty dumb.
Because
give you that.
There's no point in that. Well, we are going to transition now to our conversation with Rachel O'Brien to give you this full picture of DEI, why Senate Bill 1 is necessary in Ohio, the impact that these policies and faculty are having at Ohio's public universities. It's an eye-opening conversation. You won't want to miss it. It's coming up next on The Narrative. Hey, Narrative listeners. Christians in the marketplace today face more unique and challenging threats than ever before. Businesses are following woke capitalism, chambers of commerce are beholden to social justice, and secular activists are chipping away Christians' First Amendment rights. As Ohio's only Christian chamber of commerce, the Christian Business Partnership stands in the gap to advocate for, to educate, and to celebrate Christian business owners. Joining the partnership also allows businesses to provide their employees with healthcare insurance, workers' compensation, and exclusive banking and educational discounts. To find out more and to join, go to cbpohio.org. That's cbpohio.org. And we're back on The Narrative. Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and we're joined now with Executive Director of the Christian Business Partnership, Monty Lobb, who's making his first appearance on the podcast, and we're grateful to have him as we are talking with Rachel O'Brien, the Deputy Public Policy Director for Open the Books. She joined Open the Books in 2021 after more than a decade in journalism, writing and editing for New York newspapers. She regularly authors investigations on state and federal spending, oversees a weekly wasteful spending column, and regularly appears on TV and radio to discuss Open the Books investigations. She's a graduate of Stony Brook University School of Journalism and lives in New York with her family and 3 cats. Rachel, it's good to have a fellow cat person on The Narrative for a change. Welcome to the show.
Happy to be here, especially among cat people.
Well, I don't you guys, man.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
I got a dog. We're dog people over here. We got a what the dog trainer called a sweet dummy golden retriever at home, and so anyway.
Well, enough
even
about
cat people love golden retrievers, so
that's good. That's good.
That's true. I do have a golden as well as my 3 cats, so I've just got
and
the
6
full
kids. So there's that. But anyway,
we're off to a great start talking about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion among the animal species that share our homes with us. But in terms of what's going on at the state level and state university level, Rachel, tell us broad overview of what DEI is, and then we want to get into specifically some of your work and reports you've done here in Ohio.
Yeah, so diversity, equity, and inclusion, as anyone who's been paying attention knows, just from the top down, President Trump just soon after taking office for a second term, announced that there would be a ban on DEI throughout the federal government, and that would trickle down really to anyone who's getting federal funding. And so, diversity, equity, and inclusion sounds like a good thing, but it's not about equality or equal opportunity. It's a radical ideology. It forces people into groups of oppressor and oppressed, and it does the opposite of its claims to be inclusive. It's divisive, and it makes racial prejudice okay. So, people of color who've been historically discriminated against, they don't need programs that now discriminate against white men. That doesn't help lift up a group of people. So two wrongs don't make a right, and more people are starting to understand that. And so, sort of, we've come to expect this kind of DEI effort from the, ivory towers of Harvard or UC Berkeley. But we looked at Ohio State University, Midwestern Big Ten school. The vice president and the author of Hillbilly Elegy, D. Vance, he's among the alumni. So it's not the first place you'd expect DEI to take hold, but here it is. And he's called out OSU for their DEI efforts.
So even though we're celebrating Ohio State's national championship, this is something that we should not be celebrating, correct? Just want to make sure I got that right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. Again, there's a place for equal opportunity, and America is the land of equal opportunity, but that's not what DEI really preaches. It's not really what it's about. It is about making the oppressors, namely white people, namely white men mostly, held accountable for historical inequities of racial minorities, women, sexual minorities, people who are, transgender or gay, and essentially saying, well, these people have been discriminated against in the past. And so now we're going to essentially cast a light of, again, oppressor versus oppressed. White men are the oppressors, no matter who you are, and the oppressed are anybody else in those categories I mentioned and other categories. And so it doesn't lift these groups that it claims to lift, or maybe it does, but not certainly at the scale at which we see DEI efforts implemented. For instance,
or funded to the degree of the numbers that you reported.
That's exactly
Ohio
right.
State's like 13 million,
13.3 million. That's my question, Rachel. 13.3 million. I mean, I think in your article you said that's 1,000 students full tuition for the year. What is that 13.3 going to, right? What is that being spent on?
That's just salaries. That's just the payroll. So we got a hold of the payrolls. One of the things we do at Open the Books, the main things we do at Open the Books, is look at government spending. And so we start with payrolls and checkbooks, what governments are paying for. And so OSU's payroll for 2020, we looked at this in 2024. So we were able to look at their 2023 payroll, and we found 200 people who were working in these DEI roles. And I could give you some examples, and just their salaries added up to over $13 million. And like you said, that's the equivalent of in-state tuition and fees for over 1,000 students. So it's just such a huge amount of money, and just such a huge sort of administration of this sort of divisive, idea that DEI should be really taking over universities, and it has taken over universities. It's in every facet of the universities that embrace it. And so we've seen universities sort of make this announcement that they're eliminating their DEI offices, but they're sort of just having the people that work there now just go branch out throughout the university in all of the various offices. So you can't find people anymore. It's hard to now find when you hear these announcements that DEI are going away. In many cases, they're not. They're just renaming them and scattering them throughout the university. So at OSU, we found 200 people. They are in various departments. I mean, the highest paid, starting at the top, is the vice provost for diversity and inclusion. He's the chief diversity officer, James L. Moore. So he made $300,000. And Keisha Mitchell, the associate vice president for the Office of Institutional Equity, also made about $300,000. And so when you go down the list and you look at the payroll, you find people are just sort of scattered in these departments. So we found, for instance, there were dozens of people in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Okay, 90 people. I was looking for the number, 90 people in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. That office, sort of the name speaks for itself. That's their job, is diversity and inclusion. Then there were 32 people who worked in the Office of Institutional Equity. We looked at women's gender and sexuality studies. 26 people there. Now, this is a program that's expanded from traditional women's studies. Now it's sort of a self-described one that studies gender and sexuality as socially and culturally constructed phenomena that affect our personal lives, artistic expression, social relationships, the ways we think about ourselves in the world. That's their description of their women's gender and sexuality studies program.
And you can study that too for tens of $1,000s a year and rack up all the debt and then go work as I don't know what, but yeah.
What job are you going to get with
Right.
that degree?
Yeah.
Okay, so, and you could say that that's not traditional DEI, but it is. It is this sort of, woke ideology that gender is a socially, culturally constructed phenomena, which it's, of course, we know it's not. And so 26 professors and lecturers and instructors work there. So we included them in our DEI count. And so, again, it's spread throughout the university. It's in so many facets. There are departments that you wouldn't think of DEI as being in that department, and they are. They're just sort of spread throughout. I'm just looking at the list here, and it's the pharmacy departments, the dean of the pharmacy program. There's diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Well, and
Arts and sciences, student life.
Yeah, and I know Monty's been sort of our spearhead on this, but just quickly on this, what's not in a report like this that's hard to get is when you're a DEI officer, just looking at these officers alone, what do you do if you're the DEI officer? You do programming. Right? You do events, and some of those things we're able to get numbers on, but a lot of them just show up in a general pool that it's hard. So for all of these DEI, those two $300,000 employees you were talking about, they're not just sitting around and I don't know, thinking about, the colors of the rainbow. They're actively bringing in people for events and on top of inflicting all types of sort of Marxist ideology all over the place. And that's why this 13.3 that you guys highlight is the floor, right? I mean, who knows how much higher it could actually be of what taxpayers are spending on there.
Exactly. That's exactly right. We're looking at public records. So we're only reporting on what we know. And so that's exactly right. That's just the payroll. That's not any institutional programming or overhead or anything that's going to the costs for running these programs.
The signage right? With OSU and rainbow colors, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So it's also just so embedded in universities. So while it's not oftentimes identified, again, because it's so embedded in the different programs and the different departments, you can't really identify it. If you have teachers, professors in arts and sciences in teaching a history course or a philosophy course, and they're talking about historical, inequities, and they're talking about DEI, making a modern, applying it to modern day. Of course, there's no way to really quantify that. And so we're looking at, again, a floor. It's a floor of $13 million is the lowest number that we can actually quantify. So it's going to be much higher everywhere you look.
Hey, Rachel, I was reading an article the other day in the Wall Street Journal, and it was an expose on Colorado University of Boulder and some of the things that they've unearthed there in terms of DEI. And one of the comments at the end of the article the writer made is that he said, higher education, the mission of higher education is the pursuit of truth. So do you find that ironic at a college or university level that basically this DEI woke philosophy is anything but the pursuit of truth?
Yeah. So now everything is through the lens of equity and not truth. I was just reading an article written by a Yale student who is a journalism student who writes for the Yale Daily News and wrote a column after the October massacre of last year, Hamas, killing Israelis, and of course the kickoff of what's been a very bloody year and a half now. So she wrote from the perspective of essentially being a Jewish student on campus and talking about the terrible attack that occurred. And instead of, sort of allowing her to write this piece, they heavily edited it, including, just taking out terms that were very clearly reported by the national media, by the worldwide media. There's undisputed facts about what happened, essentially to say that you can't write from this perspective because Palestinians have been discriminated against oppressed by Israel all these years. And so they're the oppressed. We have to respect them, and we have to sort of protect them against these sorts of articles that would argue that, Israel somehow was being oppressed. Well, of course, 1,500 people died. So, so it's just this sort of, even the student newspapers are not, they're not allowing the truth to be sort of the main guide for what they're doing. It's more of that, again, DEI ideology of protecting or, putting first people who have been historically oppressed. In this case, their argument is Palestinians. And so absolutely, there's this lens where things are filtered, where students are censored, where professors are censored, if they're not sort of going along the lines of that DEI ideology.
So, Rachel, from your perspective, is Ohio State, is it typical? Is it worse? Is it better? I mean, you guys do these investigations all over the country. How do we put Ohio State in context here with the rest of the country?
They are so now we haven't looked at every university. We've sort of done, we've selected 10, in this most recent report that we did, we selected the 10 of the top public universities across the country, OSU being one of them. And so they were among the top in terms of number of DEI staffers. So 200 employees. We also looked at University of Virginia and University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. They exceeded the 200 mark.
And that's just employees that have DEI in their title, have some type of DEI title.
Right. So, for instance, UC Berkeley, right? Everyone expects UC Berkeley to have this huge number of DEI employees. Well, their payroll was opaque. And so their titles that they give people we weren't really able to search for people because they weren't given the true titles that they have. If you Google employees' names and you come upon their bios or their LinkedIn pages, they clearly work in a DEI role, but the payroll doesn't reflect that. Right. And so, OSU is really kind of transparent in what these employees are doing. And we're able to say there's 200 people here. Right. Exactly. Who have it in their title. There are certainly more people. And again, with UC Berkeley having, I think the list we were able to cut, it was like 13 people. There's definitely more than 13 people working in DEI at UC. So OSU, again, UVA and UNC Chapel Hill were the ones that most clearly labeled people that we were able to identify, more than 200. And so, in a university system, it's not that shocking to see. Unfortunately, we do see a lot of this. You do see just dozens and dozens and dozens, multiple departments that are named diversity and or equity and or inclusion. It's just not just one, or subsets of offices within departments. So it's not that uncommon. It's not that uncommon. The 200 number is very big, though. One of the bigger of the 10 that we looked at for this particular report.
Well, and to the point about how this can take on a new life of its own with these deep roots that you can't really weed out of these universities. We just saw a report here in Ohio not too long ago of other public universities that, when faced with cutting their DEI program or being told to cut their DEI programs in order to make the budget work. They actually cut some academic programs and kept the DEI staff in place. And it just completely antithetical to what universities are supposed to be doing and prioritizing academics of the students that are attending there.
Yeah, that's nonsense. It's crazy. We're going to see probably quite a bit of this hiding the DEI work and DEI employees in federal agencies. Now that President Trump has made this signed that executive order, grant making under the Biden administration was very DEI focused. It was very clear that these agencies were rewarding grants that had DEI components, a commitment to, especially universities, still in many cases are still doing it. A lot have rolled it back now, requiring that staff that are applying for jobs make a commitment, a stated commitment to DEI. If you don't have that stated commitment to DEI, I don't think you're even considered as an applicant. And so it is so embedded. One thing I was just thinking I was going to talk about, it just escaped my mind, but it's just so broad. It's so sort of pervasive here's what I was going to say. Another report we did recently is on DODEA, which is the Department of Defense's schools. So these are schools run by the Department of Defense for service members, and these are K through 12 schools. In that instance, the head of DEI for DODEA had made very public, I think on Twitter, statements, very racially insensitive statements, very much hating white people, very public about it. And so we sort of reported on this. We called out not only her high pay, but that she was very very inappropriate in this person who's leading students at military schools. And so there were discussions in Congress. They demanded that DODEA sort of knock it off, that the head of Kalisa Wing is her name, be disciplined and not be able to do this. What they ended up doing is they ended up hiding it. They said, "Okay, we're going to sort of roll this back," and they didn't. They continued that DEI structure, but they hid it. And so when we called them out on that again and realized that this had been hidden, they then said, "Well, we're going to reassign her." And so she no longer is the head of DEI at DODEA, but she's still employed at DOD, and she's actually making more now than she was then. So she didn't lose out on this at all. So we're going to see that a lot in federal agencies. We're going to see it, in universities where I think, maybe especially places like that are fighting it, right? Where there's not a sort of a consensus among lawmakers. We can't expect universities to comply, even if this law in Ohio does pass. Universities are still going to be determined to keep DEI alive, even if it's not going to be labeled DEI. We've actually seen some labels change. UC Berkeley, they have an institute, I believe it's called Belonging and Othering, and so wow. We had to search for the term "other" in the payroll. So they just start using different terms for the same thing.
Othering is not a word, just for what it's worth. It's not an actual word, and that's a title at a university. So if you want to know how stupid this stuff is, sorry, Mahan. Yeah.
No, I took right where I was going to go with that. Or are they going to hide it, or are they going to get more brazen and just be bold about it? But it seems like also this is tied to a lot of illegal hiring practices that are discriminatory. That is, not constitutional. Again, just in reading that the article about Colorado University, that a lot of the hiring that they did was tied to hiring activists who were also professors, but that fit that mold of what they wanted. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is discriminatory to demand that people have these commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Obviously, it is sort of it's requiring people to change their speech, right? So it's not censoring them. It's what's the word I'm looking for? It's forced speech, and so that's incredibly discriminatory. You're not, you're having people. You're putting such an emphasis on this one thing that you're missing out on intellectual diversity. You're missing out on, experts in fields that really could be benefiting students. Again, this is also, universities are supposed to be for the benefit of students. So are you benefiting students by having this compelled speech, by overlooking people's, resumes and in favor of just focusing on this one thing? Of course not. It's not benefiting students. And again, at Open the Books, we focus on the money. We focus on the dollars. And so 1,000 students at OSU paid for the DEI infrastructure. Is that a good use of 1,000 students' money? A lot of people would probably argue no. There could be many other things that 1,000 students' tuition could pay for other than the DEI infrastructure.
Yeah. Well, especially as tuition continues to go up in all these places. And again, I just sitting here thinking about Damani's point on hiring, the intrinsic racism of these diversity hires, because it's a racist thing to say that all black people, for example, think alike, right? And then you're requiring, though, that we have a quota of black people so we have enough people that think this way. Like it's internally racist in and of itself. Rachel, for me, there's been a lot of books written and a lot of people, I think of Carl Trueman's work and Rusty Reno's work that have talked about sort of this long slog of critical theory and DEI and Marxism, whatever you want to call it, that has sort of corrupted higher education. But then there's a really practical piece of this, which is especially, UC Berkeley is one thing, right? But Ohio has, for the most part, been under control of Republicans for a long time, right? And sometimes we have, a Strickland or somebody like that has been there, but for at least for the better part of over a decade now, we've had Republicans, and I've been at CCV over 8 years now. There was never once an allocation or an appropriation in the budget for DEI departments at these universities, right? For $13.3 million for DEI at Ohio State, right? That never happened. How did this happen? What was, and especially how did this happen at public institutions where they have to have their money allocated from elected, in many ways, conservatives?
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of a slow creep, or maybe not so slow. I think it started, well, so there's things like, Title IX and, access for disabled students. And so like that sort of thing we've always seen. And obviously it's a good thing. You want to make sure that students are being treated properly. But I think sort of this slow creep of, Black Lives Matter, I think inflamed things a lot. You couldn't really have a conversation with most moderates to liberals about that without them saying, "Oh, well, we've got to, sort of fight this. Cops can't be killing Black people," and of course, right. But so it sort of became this thing. It's like, well, if you don't agree that Black Lives Matter and you don't agree that, diversity, equity, inclusion is important, then you're racist. And so I think it became just this conversation where, you don't want to be branded racist and you don't want to lose your job for opposing DEI. So if you're at an institution where the trend is moving that way, you've got to embrace it. I can't imagine all of these university leaders, and it's not just universities, we see it in K through 12 schools sometimes. I mean, we see it in institutions like hospitals. We see it all over the place where it's sort of just moved in that direction, and if you either embrace it or get left behind. And so I think it just kind of happened in a way that even people who didn't embrace it had to embrace it. because that's sort of just the momentum that was, that was occurring again during when Black Lives Matter, in its infancy before it became the corrupt organization that we know it is today, embezzling money, not doing the work they claim to be doing. So again, I think it just became this conversation where it's like, well, don't you care about people who are oppressed? Oh yeah, I do. I do care about people. I want to help them. Okay, well then you've got to have this huge component, embedded in your university, paying $13 million a year to people. So, I mean, that sort of is a very generalization, I think, and it's, kind of my opinion, but that's the way I saw it unfolding.
Well, and Rachel, that playbook has worked for the left for decades. I mean, basically, it's gift wrap packaged in a different way. It's a new branding, calling it DEI. But I mean, this organization, CCV, for decades has been accused of all kinds of things. We recall the longest time, oh, you right-wing, Jerry Falwell-loving, book-burning, censor, bigots. Now we're Nazis. Right. So it's just a different name, but it's the same playbook.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think anytime you have something like this, it does come full circle after a while. They sort of start to eat their own, and you see people being taken down by their own ideology. I've seen it a few times now. People who claim to embrace this end up being, sort of beaten out of their jobs or what have you. And so, again, with President Trump, having this ban at the federal level, and it's going to sort of trickle down in funding,
Yeah.
These universities that get federal funding, they're certainly, I can't imagine they're going to be rewarded for having their DEI offices intact. So we'll see. Of course, they're going to fight it. There's going to be lawsuits. But it has reached the point where I think people are starting to come around and realize this isn't exactly what we were sold. This is not what we agreed to.
Well, and I think, for us, and I'm sure we have a lot of our liberal friends and some of the media that love to listen to our podcast and cut quotes. So this will be a good quote for them to take. But for me, things like Senate Bill 1, the ban on DEI spending at universities, is just needs to just be the beginning, because to your point, the worst thing we could do here is pass bills like this or look at the Trump EO and say the problem's solved. To me, what these bills represent more of is, for the first time, and we talked about this a few weeks ago, for the first time, the appropriators, which are the elected representatives, are exercising their authority over universities and over what money is spent on in a way that we haven't, at least in a long time, right? Because I think that the question of how we got here is, my interpretation of it is we let the left and the media, in the name of academic freedom, bully appropriators, the elected people, to say how the money is going to get spent, bully them into just closing their eyes and sending billions of dollars to these universities every year, and not allowing them to any effort to say, well, why are we spending money on gender studies and a lot of these programs, even outside of these DEI offices? They were bad ideas from the get-go. But anytime there was any remote question of saying, hey, why is that program? If Denison University or these private colleges want to do it, hey, they're private, go for it. If people want to pay for that, but why are we spending taxpayer dollars on that? We've never. Just now, it feels like just now we're willing to have that conversation, and hopefully this will lead to broader conversations, deeper conversations about how is the money being spent. And I think really what you're seeing, the model for that is what Governor DeSantis is doing in Florida, where they're appointing trustees who are really drilling in and have the time and energy to actually dig into those actual expenditures at the colleges.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the only thing I have to add on to that is again, this is taxpayer money. People forget that.
Yes.
And so it has to be answered for. There are questions that are asked and they have to be answered. Is it a legitimate use of money? Is it government blessed discrimination? And it is blatant discrimination in many cases. And so the public is waking up to a little bit, especially when they see the numbers, especially when they see $13 million. That's a lot of money, that could pay for a lot of things. And so, like you said, private universities, they want to do with their tuition money and their endowment money, whatever they want, go ahead. But this is taxpayer money. And so there are rules that are attached to that. And of course, each administration changes those rules. And so we're seeing those rules being changed now. Again, the Biden administration did infuse a DEI component into many different grants, not just educational institutions, but scientific research grants. We saw DEI involved in many research grants, environmental grants, of course. All of these things sort of just had it fused in there. And so, again, those priorities change with each administration. We're going to see, less money going to this because it's not government's responsibility to fund discrimination. And that's what it comes down to. So, we'll see less money, hopefully, unless it just goes hidden and then it's hard to find and you can't account for it.
Yeah, that's a great place to wrap up, I think, Rachel, because the people that believe in what DEI is preaching, the worldview that's driving it, it's actually not going anywhere. But through your work at Open the Books, if you expose where the waste is, you can at least cut off the funding for this kind of stuff. So as people want to follow along with what you're doing and what Open the Books is continuing to bring to light, where can they find that stuff and what's the best way to plug into the latest information?
Yeah, our website is openthebooks.com. So you can follow us there. We actually have a really cool tool called Benjamin. You can search payroll and checkbook figures all across the country. You can search a name, you can search a city, you can search a vendor. So openthebooks.com and then our Substack. So Substack at .openthebooks.com. That's where we post all of our investigations.
Rachel O'Brien, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation. We're grateful that you took time to join us today on The Narrative. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.